Buckle up, because the world just got a whole lot stranger. Prepare to have your mind blown as we unveil discoveries so incredible, so unbelievable, they'll make you question everything you thought you knew about our reality. From ancient artifacts that rewrite history to scientific breakthroughs that redefine the possible, these astonishing findings will leave you breathless with wonder. Brace yourself for a journey into the unknown, where the truth is stranger than fiction.
First up, we have the leopard seal, and before you tell me they aren't scary, you're wrong. Not only do these things have razor-sharp teeth and an appetite for insides, their back teeth are literally serrated to help them tear apart their prey better. And if that doesn't shout carnivore with a non-discerning palate, I really don't know what does. So let's get to know these guys a little better. Leopard seals are the third largest seal in the world, and they like to be alone. They swim underwater, and they are the only seals known to reportedly hunt and devour warm-blooded prey. By the way, we're warm-blooded. I will save you the search. Yes, they have attacked humans, and of the recorded attacks, one has resulted in a fatality. Oh, and sometimes they attack their babies, so don't think they'd have any qualms about coming for you. They're cute, but I will not be taking my chances. Nor would I want to take my chances with this next one, because next up we have the colossal squid. Not to be mistaken for the giant squid, they are actually vastly different animals belonging to two separate squid families. I mean, they're both squid, so really how different can they be? But anyways, some differences between the two include the fact that while the giant squid is slightly longer, its colossal counterpart has a much larger and heavier body, weighing an average of 490 kilograms, which is 1,080 pounds, in comparison to the giant squid, which comes in at an average of just 275 kilograms, which is about 606 pounds. Furthermore, the colossal squid has one of the largest eyes of any known creature to ever exist, and unlike any other squid out there, this thing has hooks in its tentacles and a bite force of 100 pounds per square inch. In short, I wouldn't look at this thing the wrong way if you paid me. And next on the list we have the southern sleeper shark. Keep in mind that the Drake Passage is nearly impossible to explore, so it should come as no surprise that even when we are able to make discoveries within its waters or along its shores, they tend to be quite surface level. That being said, there is not much we really know about this shark, but what we do know is that this shark is a member of the dogfish shark species. Generally, the males measure in at around 13 feet, while the females come in at around 14.2 feet. The largest of the species ever discovered came in at 15. Their lifespan is unknown, and their existence is strange due to the fact that, as a basic rule of thumb, the majority of shark species prefer to live in warmer waters, as it speeds up their physiological processing as well as their metabolic rate. Only a handful of sharks are equipped to survive in temperatures as cold as those occurring in the Drake Passage, and they do so through something called counter-current heat exchange, using the heat generated in their muscles to warm their bodies while metabolizing food much slower than their more equator-adjacent counterparts. As we near our halfway point, I feel like I owe those of you who don't know a quick lesson. The Drake Passage, which is situated between the Antarctic Peninsula and Cape Horn, the southernmost part of Chile, has some incredibly treacherous waters, with some who have voyaged along its waters having reported waves of up to 65 feet, 19.8 meters in height. Guys, that is like 4 to 6 times the size of an average one-story house. These seas are not messing around. With waves so big, it's really no wonder that the Drake Passage has been home to so many cases of triumph, tragedy, injury, and mystery too. Which brings us to our halfway point. We have the wreck of over 800 ships, in which over 20,000 sailors would have met their end in the icy cold waters of the passage. The wrecks, which occurred likely due to the aforementioned high seas along with poor weather conditions, have led to the passage landing its name in the Rocky Waters Hall of Fame, making it a place that generates much curiosity. Among the many shipwrecks that have taken place along the Drake, we have the wreck of the Antarctic, a steam engine whaling vessel that hit the waters of the Drake Passage in 1901 and met its end just a few years later after becoming surrounded by large icebergs, which crushed and eventually sunk the ship, making it the first recorded instance of a shipwreck as a result of being trapped by glaciers. This story is not all bad though, as the captain and the entirety of the crew did survive. After the loss of their ship, sailors made their way across the ice to Paulet Island, where they spent an entire winter sheltered in stone huts and living off the land before they were eventually rescued. And next on the list we have the southern elephant seal. And these things things are huge, with the males of the species averaging in at 4 to 5 meters in length, around 13 to 16 and a half feet, and weighing 3,500 kilograms, which is 7,716 pounds. These things are built like a brick, with razor-sharp teeth and an aggressive streak. The males are incredibly territorial, and therefore it is not uncommon for fights to break out amongst the communities of these animals, resulting in extreme injury for at least one, if not both, adult male elephant seals. Some cool, less violent things we know about the southern elephant seal is that they spend up to 80% of their lives in the ocean and are able to swim an average of 60 miles per day, adding up to around 15 to 20,000 miles per year, and they can do this at a speed of up to 10 miles per hour. And they can dive anywhere between 1,000 to 5,000 feet, 300 to 900 meters. It is important to note that while the animals have a regular diet of squid, fish, rays, and even sharks, there have been multiple reports of southern elephant seals attacking humans, so a safe distance is highly recommended. Another aggressive animal with incredibly sharp appendages entered the southern giant petrel, a massive carnivorous bird with an average wingspan of 200 centimeters, 6.5 feet, and a razor-sharp beak that the animal uses to tear apart its prey. This bird is not picky, as it's known to both hunt and scavenge, generally for krill, squid, or fish, but it's really not opposed to any left behind dead or decaying animals either. Oh yeah, and I think I mentioned these things are super aggressive, often taking out other petrels, large seabirds, and penguins either by beating or drowning them. But it's not just these other animals that fear this massive bird. Sailors too, as these birds have been known to attack those who have fallen overboard, targeting the face and eyes with its claws and hooked ivory beak. And next up, not only is the Drake Passage known for high waves, it is also known for incredibly high force, hurricane strength winds, along with whipping rains and hailstorms. The winds in the Drake Passage can reach up to 50 knots, 58 miles per hour, and generally come in from the west. When it rains, the cold water feels like needles against the skin, and when it hails, even worse. It is highly advised that any passengers on trips through the passage stay inside during voyages across the extreme stretch of water, and even crewmen are pressured to remain in as much cover as possible throughout their journeys. I don't know you guys, I love the ocean and I've always wanted to visit the Arctic, but I don't think I'd risk this one. Up next we have icebergs. Well, an iceberg, and not just any iceberg, but the world's largest iceberg, also known as A76A. The giant once sat at 84 miles, 135 kilometers long, and 16 miles, 26 kilometers wide. This thing is still massive, but unfortunately that might not last long. You see, for a while, A76A had been slowly drifting around Antarctica, enduring relatively no decrease in its size. But satellite imagery has revealed that the giant ice slab has taken a change of course, landing itself right into the mouth of the Drake Passage. The Drake Passage, which is known to push icebergs right on through its treacherous cold waters, sending them northwards into much warmer ones. You can probably guess why this is not an ideal scenario. With already rising water temperatures, the movement of this iceberg through the passage is quite an unsettling discovery, as it highlights the swift rate in which sea levels can be altered and geology can be changed. And in our number one spot, we've covered wrecked ships, but we haven't covered haunted ones. Specifically the haunted schooner Jenny, commonly referred to as just Jenny. The ship was discovered frozen inside of an ice barrier by the crew of the Hope ship in 1840, 20 years after the Jenny had originally gone missing. The men of the Hope recounted their initial sighting of the missing vessel, saying that as they approached the ship, they noticed a group of 7 men standing at attention on the main deck. But as they got closer, they realized that the men were in fact frozen solid. Upon boarding the ship, they discovered the captain also frozen solid with a pen in his hand and a journal open to his final entry on the table, which read, May 4th, 1823, no food for 71 days. I'm the only person left alive. When the members of the Hope crew departed the Jenny, they took one last look at the disheveled vessel, possibly the last look ever taken, as since their departure, the ship has yet to be located again. Starting off our list today with the Frankenstein bog mummies. In 2002, a team of archaeologists discovered 2 bodies in Scotland, belonging to 2 people who had died 3,000 years ago before being thrown into a bog where they were preserved and mummified and then buried 300 to 600 years later. One was the body of a man and the other the body of a woman, or so they thought. Upon closer inspection, researchers quickly realized that something about the skeletal remains of both bodies weren't quite right. The man's limbs seemed out of place and the woman's woman's jaw was slightly too large for her skull. Fast forward 10 years to 2012, and researchers discovered that they didn't find the body of 2 people, but the body parts of at least half a dozen. The woman was made up of body parts from people who had all died around the same time, while the man was made up of parts belonging to people who had died up to hundreds of years apart. Not only that, but evidence suggested that when the parts were put together, they would have still had mummified flesh on their bones, which is unpleasant to say the least, but it's a super dark and incredibly interesting discovery.
So this is incredibly cool. Archaeologists in Crete may have recently come across the most famous labyrinth in all of history, the labyrinth that was said to hold the Minotaur from Greek mythology. The Minotaur was a fearsome creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, which lived in a labyrinth on the island of Crete, as the story goes. So this 4,000-year-old labyrinth on the island of Crete may have been the actual inspiration for that ancient story, which is amazing. The labyrinth was found on Papara Hill, and it's the first structure of its kind discovered in the area. The Greek Ministry of Culture says the Minoan civilization built it between 2000 and 1700 BCE. It has 8 circular stone walls arranged into a maze formation, and some parts of the walls are still standing up to 5.5 feet high. The structure is divided into 4 sections by internal walls, creating a series of passageways, and inside there's a small circular building also divided into quadrants. Now, aside from the labyrinth's potential connection to that mythological tale of the Minotaur, they're still not 100% sure what it was actually built for, but they did find a bunch of animal bones that may have been used for rituals and offerings. Either that, or animals just wandered into the maze and then were never able to make it out. That's always a possibility as well.
Next up, we have a mass grave discovered in Slovakia just 2 years ago, in 2022, containing approximately 35 skeletons, the majority of which were missing their heads. The grave dates all the way back to 5000 BC, and researchers believe that the bodies excavated from the site likely belonged to the victims of sacrifice. Due to the grave site, which is essentially just a large ditch's proximity to a defense wall, archaeologists studying the find have theorized that the decapitated individuals were killed in the hopes that their sacrificial deaths would strengthen the wall and therefore provide safety to the communities living in the area. Many of the skeletons found belong to people who died around the middle or near end of their pre-adulthood lives, I'm talking 20 and under, which indicate that they might have been sacrificed for their strength, stamina, and agility.
In 2015, archaeologists made a pretty remarkable but unsettling discovery in Flanders, Belgium. They uncovered the bodies of 125 World War I soldiers in a perfectly preserved German trench system. So this area had been untouched since the war ended, hidden beneath what is now a housing development. Most of the soldiers were German, but there were also British, French, and South African men. The soldiers fell during some of the fiercest battles of the war. Some of their remains were found right where they had died. Others were buried in mass graves by their comrades, often with religious artifacts. And the site was about the size of 2 football fields on a ridge known as Hill 80. This ridge saw intense combat, especially during the First Battle of Ypres in November 1914, where a lot of German soldiers died. The area was later taken by British and Irish troops in June of 1917, but then the Germans retook it again in 1918, leading to even more casualties on both sides. There were more personal items as well, like watches, religious items like crucifixes and rosary beads, and there was even a bottle of HP sauce, which just goes to show that these were real people, you know, making food. And I think a lot of times when we look back on these wars, it's easy to disconnect from the fact that, you know, they had HP sauce they were cooking with. Makes it all seem more real.
Next up, we have a pretty macabre discovery made in 2019 during an excavation that took place in Selango, Ecuador. Along with the remains of 11 people who would have been buried at the site and multiple ancient artifacts were 2 helmets made from human bones. Skulls, to be exact, and young ones too. Apparently 2 of the young bodies they found were wearing the skulls of other slightly older young people over their heads like some kind of disturbing medieval bike helmet. I shudder to think of what they might have used for straps. While it is unknown why the helmets were placed onto the heads of the young bodies, it is assumed that it was likely done so during the time of their burials as part of a ritual designed to protect them in the afterlife. However, other theories suggest that the young bodies were buried buried as part of a ritual meant to calm an active volcano nearby, i.e. they were sacrifices. It's pretty dark.
So when you look at this image here, you probably assume this poor guy died instantly being crushed by this boulder, right? Well, it turns out that may not be the case. Don't get me wrong, he still died horrifically though. In fact, he went out in a much worse way. This is the body of a man who's been dubbed the unluckiest man, and he died in Pompeii during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. Archaeologists recently removed the boulder to examine the remains and found that the dude's skull was surprisingly intact. The Pompeii Archaeological Park made a statement about the discovery, saying, quote, "The identified skeletal remains consist of the upper part of the thorax, the upper limbs, the skull, and jaw. His death was presumably not therefore due to the impact of the stone block, as initially assumed, but likely to asphyxia caused by the pyroclastic flow." So this dude was trapped under a boulder. Yeah, I'd say he really lives up to his name. Yippee for him.
Next up, we have the Sandby Borg killings discovered in 2010 during a study of a 5th century Swedish site in the island of Åland. While excavating the grounds, an archaeologist stumbled upon the ruins of an old home, and while exploring the home, they came across a human skeleton. At first, they wondered why it wouldn't have been given a proper burial, but then they came across another, and another, until the remains of 26 people were counted by the team, all showing signs of having died at the same time due to execution-style killings. It became apparent then that a mass killing event had taken place in the home sometime between 450 and 550 AD. Also found in the home were fossilized half-eaten fish, coins, and jewelry, supporting the theory of an ambush attack. But there was no evidence to suggest who carried out the killings or why.
Here's a pretty strange recent find: plastic rocks in nature. Scientists have been looking at Brazil's volcanic Trindade Island for years, but just in 2023 there was an unsettling discovery: rocks made from melted plastic debris. The island has always been a nesting ground for green turtles, but now it's also home to these strange plastic-infused rocks. The plastic rocks are being called plastiglomerates. Plastiglomeratis? Well, they're formed from a mixture of natural sediments and plastic. So they form on plastic waste, mainly from fishing nets apparently, melts and combines with the natural material on the beach. Geologist Fernanda Avelar Santos said the place where we found these samples is a permanently preserved area in Brazil, near the place green turtles lay their eggs. This makes the discovery even more alarming, as it highlights how pervasive plastic pollution has become. She continues, "The garbage in the sea and the plastic dumped incorrectly in the oceans is becoming geological material preserved in the Earth's geological records." Interesting to see what'll happen like 100 years from now when this continues to happen.
Next up, we have a discovery made in 2003 by a group of archaeologists exploring the Atacama Desert of Chile. A mummified skeleton that at first glance looks a bit like it belongs to the body of someone or something that did not find its origins on this planet. I mean, it has 10 ribs instead of 12, giant eye sockets, and an incredibly elongated skull that ends in a point. For decades, UFO enthusiasts were convinced that the skeleton belonged to an alien, so much so that the mummy was actually featured in a 2013 UFO documentary. Unfortunately for the believers, in 2018 the alien theory was debunked when good old DNA testing decided to join the party. Turns out the genes were 100% human, and the body belonged to a young female living 500 years ago with severe genetic bone mutations. Or so they say.
And finally we have Aramumuru. This place sounds really intriguing to me. So Aramumuru is a rock formation near Lake Titicaca in Peru, which has some very strange stories attached to it. So this massive stone structure is often referred to as the Gate of the Gods. It stands about 23 feet tall and has a perfectly carved 7-meter high rectangular niche in its center. So the question has always been though, what is the origin of this place? What was it made for? Local folklore tells tales of the pre-Inca civilization, suggesting that Aramumuru is a gateway to another dimension. According to the legend, Aramumuru was an ancient priest who used a golden disc known as the Key of the Gods of the Seven Rays to open the portal and pass through it with his followers, never to be seen again. But archaeologists and researchers of course have their own theories. Some think that the place is a ceremonial site, possibly linked to nearby Tiwanaku culture, known for its advanced understanding of stone carving and alignment with astronomy. Until this day, though, the true origin and the purpose of this place is still relatively unknown. But what makes it even weirder is that there are a number of stories of people going missing around here. There are also reports of a strange bluish glow coming from the area. We're starting off the list with this video captured in 2017 in British Columbia, Canada. This is a video, but it's the sound that really matters here. So it was early in the morning, 8:30 a.m. on December 16th in Whitsett, British Columbia. And this dude started filming the tree line when he heard an absolutely nightmarish sound echoing through the trees, far off in the distance. Take a listen to this. How frightening is that? Now sure, there are a lot of animals in British Columbia. One commenter said this sounds like it could be a mountain lion call. Not sure about that myself. I've never spent time in British Columbia, to be fair, but I've watched videos of mountain lion vocalizations and this doesn't sound like that to me. But what do you guys think? To me this sounds like a banshee. Could also be an elk. Elk makes some pretty creepy noises. Take a listen to that. Like, that's pretty cool, right? Sounds like one of the dinosaurs from Jurassic Park. Anyway, whether the creature in this video was Bigfoot, a ghost, or just a known animal, it's a freaky sound any way you slice it, and I would not want to hear that walking through the woods alone. Alright, this next story is pretty nuts. It was posted to Reddit by Donna Hotter Than a Sauna, and she talks about a run-in she and her boyfriend had with a gator. Actually, two gators. Anyway, goes like this. My boyfriend and I were walking through the woods on a nature trail when we came across a piece of alligator tail and foot that had been ripped and the rest of the body was gone. I freaked out. All I kept thinking was, I have no idea what's big enough to kill and eat an entire alligator, but I don't want to meet it. We cautiously kept walking, and a few hundred feet later saw a giant, probably 10 foot at least, alligator walking along the shoreline with a whole smaller dead alligator in its mouth. You know what's extra terrifying about that story? So they came across a huge alligator, right, that was hungry enough to eat one of its own kind. If they'd been on that walk just a little earlier, may have found them instead. Freaky stuff. Next up, we have the incredibly odd case of the Oakville Blobs. So the Oakville Blobs case was a very bizarre incident that happened in Oakville, Washington in 1994, and I cannot believe I've never heard of this case until today. Like, where have I been? What have I been doing with my life? So this is basically the real life version of the blob. These gelatinous like globs started falling from the sky, and the even scarier part is that they weren't just harmless goo. The blobs actually started making people sick. They experienced symptoms like nausea, dizziness, and respiratory issues. And when scientists looked at the blobs under a microscope, they found something even more strange. There were human white blood cells in them. Cells from our immune system were in these gooey raindrops. Like, what? What is this? How have I not heard of this before? And if you're hoping for some kind of closure to this story, that's too bad, because they've never been definitively identified. Alright, I got some cool Bigfoot footage for you next. This list is gonna be a bit all over the place, but you know, hey, the world's forests are just full of surprises. So this piece of footage was taken by Todd Standing, who's captured some pretty intriguing Bigfoot footage over the years, but this may be his most convincing. Here he saw an ape-like creature peeking out from a tree root, and he was able to focus in and get some pretty clear footage of its face. Take a look. Just look at the skin, the blinking eyes, like the subtle movements. It looks like a real face to me. Now, could it be a guy painted up with some fake fur attached to his head? Maybe. I mean, this could totally very well be a well-executed hoax. But there's also a chance It could be a real animal, too. Next up, we head to the Hessdalen Valley in Norway to discuss unidentified lights periodically spotted in the sky since the 1930s. The Hessdalen lights are this mysterious glowing phenomena that show up in the Hessdalen Valley. Sometimes they're seen during the day, sometimes at night. They can be white, yellow, or red, and have been seen above and below the horizon. They can last for just a few seconds or go on for more than an hour. Sometimes they zip around really fast, other times they sway back and forth, and occasionally they just hang in the air. The lights became especially frequent between 1981 and 84, happening up to 20 times a week. People started traveling to the area hoping to see them, but by 2010 the sightings had decreased to about 10 to 20 per year. In 1998 though, the Hessdalen Automatic Measurement Station, or the Hessdalen AMS, was set up in the valley. It was designed to keep track of and record the mysterious lights when they showed up. Until this day though, they're still not 100% sure what causes them. Next up, we have the discovery of the Saula. Now, this one may not have terrified scientists as much as get them super excited, but anytime a cryptid is found to actually exist, it's pretty incredible. This creature, native to the Annamite Mountains in Vietnam and Laos, has a couple nicknames: the Asian unicorn and the Vu Quang ox. It is an incredibly rare animal, and for a long time, it was completely unknown to the outside world, a mythological creature at best. But in 1992, these animals were discovered to actually exist, at least to researchers outside of the region anyway, and the first photograph of a Saula was taken in 1993. Did you notice that flap on the face that like flares out almost like the gill of a fish? Very strange. Cool animals. Next up, we have the whale in the jungle. And no, that's not some bizarre figure of speech. There really was a beached whale found in the Amazon jungle in 2019. This was an incredibly unexpected discovery made on Marajo Island at the mouth of the Amazon River. A 36-foot humpback whale weighing 10 tons was discovered all the way up into the jungle. The whale was a 12-month-old calf and was hidden in the undergrowth about 50 feet from the sea. So experts were pretty confused about how the whale made its way so deep into the jungle. One possible explanation is that rough seas might have tossed the creature out of the water and into the woods, but those must have been some pretty powerful waves. Darlene Silva from SEMA, the Brazilian Environmental Department, explained that the whale was found because scavenging birds were circling above the hidden carcass in the bush. Renita Emin, a marine specialist, was pretty surprised by the find as well, saying, "We're still not sure how it landed here, but we're guessing that the creature was floating close to the shore, and the tide, which has been pretty considerable over the past few days, picked it up and threw it inland into the mangrove." What's also strange about this though is that the humpback whales are usually found in the Bahia area from August to November, so how did one end up on the north coast of Brazil in February? Whales usually migrate to Antarctica after their time in Bahia, so it just makes this find even more strange. Let's talk about more creepy noises though, coming from the woods. Here's another. This video was posted to YouTube by Chris Simpkins, who heard this strange metallic sound coming from the woods near his home one night. Take a listen to this. Yeah, that's a bit creepy, ain't it? The video was taken on September 6th, 2016, about 8 p.m. in North Smithfield, Rhode Island. In the video description, Chris dispels some theories people had about what the sound could have been, writing, "There was almost no wind last night. We've lived here for a year and never heard this before. Even during the windiest of days, there aren't any trains nearby. And the background noise is just crickets/frogs in my yard, and maybe me crying a bit behind the phone." Anyway, let us know in the comments what you think of this one. Is it aliens? Is there some kind of power tool that can make a noise like that? Let us know what you think. Now, this next story may not sound like much to some of you, but I find this one pretty unsettling, and I wanted to throw it in. I think some of the scariest things we can come across is the absence of anything. Complete silence and isolation. And Reddit user I Don't Care, I Like Dogs made a post about exactly that. They write, "I live in a really remote part of Alaska. I think the scariest thing I've ever encountered is how silent the woods tundra can be in the dead of winter. I'm talking like I feel I'm about to go insane quiet. It's absolutely unnerving. I became hyper aware of my heartbeat, and my breathing sounds like an effing airplane taking off, and I know a lot of people will say, oh, it's because a predator was nearby. No, man, some places up here just have nothing. That's what really freaks me out. I am absolutely alone in this one spot. I could drop dead and no one would ever find my body. And yeah, I just find that kind of unsettling. And finally, we have the lost city of Z. Percy Harrison Fawcett was a British explorer who set out in 1925 to find the lost city he called Z in the Amazon rainforest. Fawcett believed this ancient city held all these untold riches and a sophisticated civilization. Accompanied by his son Jack and friend Rayleigh Rimmel, Fawcett ventured into uncharted territory, never to be seen again. The expedition vanished without a trace, and there were tons of rescue attempts, including one by famed aviator Charles Lindbergh, but no sign of Fawcett or his companions has ever been found. One theory is that Fawcett just died as a result of all the harsh stuff out there in the jungle. Could have been eaten by an animal or something. Definitely very likely, but there's a more interesting and more intriguing theory that he and his crew may have actually found this lost city deep within the Amazon where they started a new life, living happily ever after down there. Over the years, there have been expeditions that set out to uncover the fate of Fawcett and the lost city of Z, but the Amazon is dense and dangerous, and to this day, the fate of Fawcett and the existence of this lost city is still a mystery.
First on our list today, we have the discovery and revival of an ancient virus freed from the Antarctic permafrost after 48,500 years. Oh my gosh, have we learned nothing from sci-fi and television? You do not restore ancient viruses. You don't do it. Well, they did it. The zombie virus was discovered as a result of melting ice in the Antarctic region after laying dormant for tens of thousands of years. And honestly, scientists believe that while the risks are low, much like your ex, it does raise red flags as a potential endangerment to human health. The virus was returned to its former infectious glory in a lab after being inserted with cultured cells. Luckily for us, as of yet, scientists have only attempted to reanimate viruses that target single-cell amoebas, not humans or animals. That's great and all, but it still seems like pretty risky business to me. The scientist who performed the reanimation maintains he has done so to shed light on the potential risk of more dangerous viruses' ability to resurface and affect humans should the Antarctic permafrost continue to melt. Not only that, but as the ice continues to thaw, it also has the potential to release chemical and radioactive waste into our ecosystems. So, think about that. Next up, we have the discovery of a hidden landmass, frozen in time and ice, and estimated to be bigger than Belgium. The landscape consists of hills and valleys believed to have been carved by ancient rivers over millions of years ago. Its existence was confirmed using a technique called radio echo sounding, which uses sound waves to determine distances, based off of which corresponding maps of underground structures and landscapes can be created. Without even laying eyes on an area, we are able to determine the heights of its peaks and the depths of its deepest points. The area of land stretching 32,000 square kilometers, 12,000 square miles, is a scientific marvel, as scientists believe its climate and geology to have been massively different from that of modern-day Antarctica. Which of course brings me to my next point. Also discovered within the ice and hidden beneath the frozen desert were the remains of an estimated 90 million year old subtropical rainforest. Scientists were so excited when, deep beneath the ice, they discovered an incredibly well-preserved network of root systems within a sediment core sample. A sediment core sample is basically like a ground extraction that shows all the layers of sediment that have settled over the last, I guess in this case, 90 million years. Not only did they find root systems, but the soil was so well preserved that they were also able to find traces of pollen, spores, and the remains of flowering plants. Based on these findings, it was concluded that the coast of West Antarctica at one point in time contained a thick, swampy rainforest which was home to a large variety of plant and animal species. Scientists also concluded weather patterns of heavy rainfall and heightened levels of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Next on the list we have BLOOD Falls. I apologize for having to spell it out for you. I don't think I'm allowed to say that word on here, but just by the look, I'm sure you can guess where the name comes from. So let's talk about the color. If you want to guess how it happens, I'll give you a moment. Maybe pause the video, head to the comments, lock in your answer. You done? Okay, the answer is iron, but not in the way you think. The red waters are rich in iron, but they don't actually turn red until they come into contact with the air. Well, maybe you did think that, but let me explain further. It's actually a mix of iron oxides and hydroxides along with high salt content in the water, chlorine and magnesium that give the river flow its yellow, orange and reddish coloring rather than the classic like murky brown we would usually see coming out of eroded sink faucets. Super creepy, but again, super cool. Next up we have the discovery of ancient bacteria like nothing we've ever seen on Earth before. Like, it's so strange, scientists wonder if it might possibly have come from like outer space. Perhaps a passenger on an ancient asteroid that arrived on Earth millions of years ago. And why do they think that? Well, because generally bacteria has a minimum requirement of 6 things it needs in order to survive, and those things are food, acidity, time, generally a warm temperature, oxygen, and moisture. But this bacteria just needs air, making it an absolute scientific anomaly and a massive discovery that moves us forward in our understanding of the way in which extraterrestrial organisms might be able to survive on other planets and in space. What do you guys think? As we move past our halfway point, let's go beneath the ice all the way down to the Antarctic seafloor, where the once lost ship Endurance was discovered in impeccable condition, preserved by the country's icy waters. For a long time, the Endurance shipwreck remained one of the greatest undiscovered mysteries, but that all changed in 2022 when, at a depth of 3,008 meters, the vessel was found, and that's 9,868.8 feet. The discovery was made via a combination of helicopters, underwater robots, and other state-of-the-art technology, which allowed it to be remotely filmed and explored. Although the wreck was crushed by ice and sunk over 100 years ago, the ship's name was still clearly legible along the stern of the vessel. And this is an incredible scientific feat as it highlights the extreme advances in technology, allowing us to explore some of the most inhospitable and extreme depths of our oceans. And next up we have a freaky looking, lanky underwater insect known as the giant sea spider. While they aren't actually spiders, they are in fact part of the insect family, and they are the largest sea spider found anywhere in the world, with some showing off a leg span of up to 10 inches. Ooh. These animals belong to a rare group that have no need for a respiratory system, breathing instead through their digestive system. The animal typically feeds off anemones, seaworms, jellyfish, sponges, and soft corals, making it technically carnivorous, and it feeds using a small tube which it inserts into its soft-bodied prey, allowing it to literally suck their guts out. Gross. As for the spider's guts, those are stored in the long, spindly legs of the creature, commonly found in shallow waters surrounding Antarctica. However, they have also been spotted at depths of 7,000 meters, 23,000 feet, making them highly adaptable to changes in both pressure and environment. Next up we have another relative giant, the giant Antarctic scale worm, which measures in at 20 centimeters, 7.8 inches long, and 10 centimeters, 4 inches wide. Now, that might not seem gigantic to you, but remember, it's a worm, so yeah, it's pretty big. And it's also super uncomfortable to look at. Well, from head on, but the underbelly is actually quite cool, looking as though the creature is lined with shiny gold feathers along its edges, which are actually appendages that help it move along rock formations and the sea floor. Its back is covered in scales that act as fully functioning body armor to protect against predators. Back to the head, which is, to put it nicely, unpleasant, and it's not even a head, really, it's just a fully retractable throat. While there is still so much we don't know about this recently discovered creature, the 2 sharp fangs on both its top and bottom jaw suggest it has a carnivorous diet and hunting rather than scavenging behavior. The animal is known to enjoy depths of up to 1,640 feet, and they're also super good for the underwater ecosystem, assisting in the building of reefs by recycling ocean waste through a process called worm composting, where they turn food scraps into other organic material that acts like soil for the sea floor. Next up, in our top 2 today, we have Mount Erebus, the world's southernmost, fully active volcano that last erupted in 2020 and contains a very elusive lava lake. The lava lake sits within the volcano, and it's basically a pool of molten lava that never hardens, but instead remains in a constant viscous fluid state. While you might have assumed this kind of thing to exist at the bottom of every active volcano around the world, you'd be incorrect, as they are actually incredibly rare because they require an incredibly specific set of conditions to be able to form. You see, a volcano's lava is generally held way underground in something called a magma chamber that connects to a volcano through an underground channel in the Earth's crust. And ever so often, under the right conditions, the magma chamber sends lava shooting up through the channel and the crater of the volcano into the atmosphere. A lava lake is different. It exists above ground within the crater of a volcano, and the bottom of the lake is connected to the magma chamber by a much shorter passageway called a conduit, which is basically like a long pipe. The lava from the chamber rises into the lake, and when the lava begins to cool, it moves back down towards the chamber to heat and rise once more. Thus, the lake remains unfrozen and in constant flow. Also a pretty cool sight to see. And finally, last on the list, we have ancient skulls, or at least that's what they kind of look like. These elongated skulls were allegedly found in 2016 by a team of archaeologists working in Antarctica. The discovery was shocking, and the bones dated all the way back to 1820, and it was originally believed that humans had not set foot in Antarctica until hundreds of years later. Of course, the timeline, along with the appearance of the bones, has led many to speculate that these bones are not belonging to the first humans in Antarctica, but rather the first extraterrestrials on Earth. While scientists are still baffled by the age of the bones, the shape of them didn't come as too much of a surprise to professionals, as the elongated skulls have been discovered in other places around the world and have been attributed to ritualistic physical cultural practices done by certain ancient societies. It has been said, however, that these particular skulls appear to not only be elongated, but much bigger than any to have ever been found before. So, who knows, maybe aliens aren't such a bad guess after all.
Starting off, we have the landing. Japan became the 5th country in history to reach the moon when one of its spacecrafts without astronauts successfully made a soft landing on the lunar surface early last week. However, space officials said they need more time to analyze whether the smart lander for investigating moon, aka SLIM, achieved its mission priority of making a pinpoint landing. SLIM landed on the moon at about 12:20 a.m. Tokyo time, and there was a tense wait for news after the Japanese Aerospace Exploration Agency's mission control initially said that SLIM was on the lunar surface, but that it was still checking its status. Now, no further details were given until a news conference nearly 2 hours later, but even now, it's kinda hard to find information about the landing. I mean, what are they hiding from us? I need to know. The space officials believe the SLIM small rovers were launched as planned and that the data was being transmitted back to Earth, said Hitoshi Kanenaka, head of the Institute of Space and Astronautical Science, a unit of Japan's space agency. Now up next, we have moon rocks. It has been found that the oldest moon rocks are older than the oldest Earth rocks. The oldest moon rock returned to Earth is an anorthosite that was found by the Apollo 16 astronauts. It's estimated to be around 4.46 billion years old. Now that is just insane. Now this date corresponds to the formation of a larger lunar impact basin from which the rock was thrown. Other studies indicate that the rock lay exposed on the lunar surface for 8.6 million years after it was moved again by the formation of a nearby crater known as Spook Crater. Again, it is an anorthosite, the rock that makes up the light-colored lunar highlands. Now the oldest rocks found on Earth are about 4.28 billion years old. Now ancient rocks are rare on Earth because of active geologic forces, including plate tectonics and erosion, recycling, and removing the oldest surfaces. But with not that many people on the moon and messing with them, it's easier to find them there than on Earth. Now it's just crazy to me that these rocks are that old. Moving on to the weird substance. The discovery was made by a U-2 Drive team member in July 2019 during Lunar Day 8 of the rover's mission, which was a part of China's Change 4 mission to explore the far side of the moon. They discovered an object in the middle of a small crater that was initially described by Our Space, a Chinese language science outreach channel, which could be translated as gel-like. So yes, there was a gel-like substance found on the moon. Now, outside scientists suspected the substance was glassy material created by impact that turned out to be correct. In their article Earth and Planetary Science Letters, Gu Sheng and colleagues analyzed data from U-2's panoramic and hazard avoidance cameras and the rover's visible and near-infrared spectrometer (VNIS) instrument. They use a procedure called spectral unmixing to break down the measured spectra from VNIS to determine the likely composition and abundance of the material. Now, the authors describe the material as a dark greenish and glycerine impact melt bacteria measuring 20 inches by 6 inches. Now, these features are signs of possible presence of glasses, which are usually sourced from impact melts or from volcanic eruptions. Now let's discuss new elements found. The Indian Space Research Organization ISRO has made a landmark discovery on the moon's south pole using its Pragyan moon rover. A bunch of elements including sulfur, iron, calcium, manganese, oxygen, titanium, aluminum, corium, and silicon were identified. Notably, the absence of hydrogen raises questions regarding the presence of water ice in the area, a discovery scientists eagerly anticipate. Now, this achievement by Pragyan represents the first in situ measurements of these elements at the lunar location. Although the South Pole was previously recognized for its large water ice deposits, this new data reshapes our understanding of it. Now, to identify these elements, the rover employed laser-induced breakdown spectroscopy (LIBS), a technique that applies intense heat to rocks, converting them to plasma, which is then analyzed. Now we have secret moon layers. A groundbreaking discovery has been found on the moon, as recent research has found evidence of hardened lava layers just 300 feet beneath the moon's dusty and cratered surface, hinting at volcanic activities from a very long time ago. While the findings are yet to be definitively confirmed, the Change 4's lunar rover's low-frequency ground-penetrating radar has been instrumental. The rover, under the leadership of astrophysicist Yongqing Fen from the Planetary Science Institute of Arizona, has detected differences in subsurface materials. Now, this has led researchers to theorize that the moon experienced lava flows for 1 billion years longer than previously believed. The densest volcanic material, deep below the surface, is much wider compared to the shallower volcanic layers, suggesting a gradual reduction of volcanic activity over time. Now, the most extensive layers measured about 230 feet across, whereas the shallow ones span only 5 meters. Now, this tapering off of volcanic activity is indicative of the moon's diminishing internal thermal energy. Now, over time, the eruptions would have become progressively smaller until they ceased entirely. Current data points to 3 or 4 significant lava flow events in the Von Karman's crater alone. Now, an ongoing investigation holds significant promise though, as if validated, it may reshape our understanding of the moon's geologic history, hinting at a more dynamic past with lava-filled landscapes, opposed to the kind of boring, dusty moon we see today. Now, did you know that there's water on the moon? Scientists say they have discovered water trapped inside tiny beads of glass scattered across the moon, suggesting a potential reservoir of this precious resource for future human activities on the lunar surface. The moon was long believed to be dry, but over the past few decades, several missions have shown that there is water both on the surface and trapped inside minerals. In 2023, scientists said that an analysis of lunar soil samples retrieved in 2020 during China's robotic Changes 5 mission showed that these spheres of glass, rock melted and cooled, bore within them water molecules formed through the action of the solar wind on the moon's surface. Now, the moon lacks bodies of liquid water, but its surface is thought to harbor a fairly substantial amount of water, for example in ice patches residing in permanently shadowed locales and trapped in minerals. Researchers see promise in obtaining the water from the glass beads, perhaps through a heating process to release vapor that would then turn into liquid through condensation. Now, about 3.8 pounds of soil were collected in the Changes 5 mission, with 32 glass beads, tens to hundreds of micrometers wide, were examined in the study from the small amount of soil made available for this research. research. Now, I'm not gonna lie, this is pretty cool if you ask me. Our next topic is moon crystals. A rare lunar crystal found on the near side of the moon is giving scientists hope of providing limitless power for the world. Yeah, this sounds like something out of a cartoon, but it's real. The lunar crystal is made of material previously unknown to the scientific community and contains a key ingredient for the nuclear fusion process, a form of power generation that harnesses the same forces that fuel the sun and other stars in the galaxy. The crystal was found in the lunar basalt particles collected from the moon in 2020 and makes China the third country to discover a new lunar material, behind the US and the former Soviet Union. The Chinese moon mission landed in December 2020 and was the first lunar sample return mission since the 1970s. Now, lunar samples were collected and delivered safely to Earth, and the crystal itself is transparent and roughly the width of a single human hair. It formed in a region of the moon that was volcanically active around 1.2 billion years ago. Now, one of the primary ingredients found in this crystal is helium-3, which scientists believe may provide a stable fuel source for nuclear fusion reactors. Now, the element is incredibly rare on Earth, but it seems to be fairly prevalent on the moon. China's next mission is expected to be Changes 6 in 2024, which will attempt to collect the first samples from the far side of the moon, which never faces Earth. Now we have the early history of the moon. The moon is ancient and still preserves its early history, aka the first billion years. The extensive record of impact craters on the moon, when calibrated using absolute ages of lunar rock samples, provides a key for unraveling timescales for the geologic evolution of Mercury, Venus, and Mars based on their individual crater records. Remote sensing of other planets or the interpretation of geologic features via images and other data is based in part on lessons learned from the moon. Now, before Apollo, for example, the origin of lunar impact craters were not fully understood, and the origin of similar craters on Earth was highly debated. Next up, the moon is lifeless. The Apollo program was a super important moment in human history. For example, the program was responsible for landing the first human beings on the surface of the moon. However, the Apollo missions contributed much more than putting humans on the moon. It also produced a lot of new scientific data and discoveries, which expanded our knowledge of both the moon itself and our solar system. If you didn't know, the moon is lifeless. Well, unless there's astronauts on it. It contains no living organisms, fossils, or native organic compounds. Extensive testing revealed no evidence for life, past or present, among lunar samples. Even non-biological organic compounds are amazingly absent, and traces can be attributed to the contamination by meteorites. And last on our list is the origin of the moon. Unlike other recent robotic missions aiming for the moon's south pole, Japan's spacecraft SLIM is targeting a site near a small lunar impact crater called Shoali, with a plain known as the Sea of Nectar that scientists suspect was formed by ancient volcanic activity. There, it will investigate the composition of rocks that may help scientists uncover the origins of the moon. A closer look at such minerals could reveal information about the moon's interior structure and formation. However, sites of the crater ejecta are usually avoided due to the difficulty of landing within a small ejecta-strewn area on the slope side surrounding a crater. Now, the SLIM probe has a vision-based navigation technology, and the spacecraft will capture photographs of the moon's surface as it approaches and rapidly pinpoint the vehicle's location on maps previously sketched out by lunar satellites, adjusting its trajectory as it swoops in for its landing. Well, that's all for our list of the top 10 mysterious discoveries Japan made on the moon. Now, there are plenty of missions lined up to send humans back to the moon, so who knows what else we could discover. What else do you think could be discovered on the moon?
Like we always do with our number 10, we're going to be talking about anesthesia. Without anesthesia to stop the pain of surgery or put patients to sleep altogether, every minor operation we take for granted today will be one of the most painful things imaginable. It was discovered in 1801 by English scientist Humphrey Davy, who was experimenting with different mixes of gases when he combined nitrogen and oxygen to make nitrous oxide. When he inhaled this, he experienced euphoria, started laughing, then crying, and then passed out. Sounds like an average Friday night for me. When he kept experimenting experimenting with it, he also found that it made him completely numb to pain. So he recommended this to dentists and doctors, and the rest of the world was like, this is great, we like this, good stuff. At number 9, we've got electricity. Now this one revolutionized the world and brought you many of the home comforts that you guys take for granted. It almost literally brought us from the dark into the light. Now electricity has obviously existed as a fundamental property of the universe since the dawn of time, but it's hard to say when humans discovered it because there's a lot of examples of them knowing what it was throughout history, but it's fair to say we really started to understand it in the way we do today sometime in the 17th century. It was then that scientists invented an early electrostatic generator, knew the difference between positive and negative currents, and the properties of electrical conductors and insulators. And then came Benjamin Franklin with his kite and lightning, and then came the light bulb, and then the rest is history. It changed the world, and it charges my phone, that's why it's on our list. Now at number 8, we've got germ theory. Before the theory of germs was proposed, nobody seemed to have a clear understanding of how diseases were spread or food became spoiled and rotten. Then in 1856, Louis Pasteur came along and said that microscopic organisms that we now call germs are floating everywhere around us in the air, undetectable to the human eye. He proved that bacteria didn't just spawn randomly and instead existed all around us, waiting to multiply and feed on decaying matter. Louis Pasteur also showed that sterilizing objects could stop bacteria from growing on them, which is a good thing for stopping disease. He also invented a technique for removing bacteria from liquid foods such as milk, so next time you have pasteurized milk, it's named after him. Coming in at number 7, we've got the Rosetta Stone. Now the ability to read and write ancient Egyptian hieroglyphics had been lost some 1500 years ago. Historians had to largely guess at what hieroglyphics meant until the discovery of the Rosetta Stone in 1799 by French soldiers in Egypt. Made of black granite, the Rosetta Stone contained a decree on behalf of the Egyptian King Ptolemy V over 2,000 years ago. The top was the confusing hieroglyphics, but the bottom was an almost identical text written in Greek. And guess what? People did know how to read Greek, so they were able to translate every single last piece of ancient Egyptian writing just because of one stone. Pretty cool stuff. At number 6 now, we've got fingerprints. Now humans have known that their fingerprints were different from one another for hundreds of years, but it wasn't until William Herschel, a British administrator in India, started using them alongside signatures in contracts that people began to implement fingerprinting as a form of ID. Then an Argentine police official called Juan Busatich started using them to identify criminals, and this discovery revolutionized the justice system. Within a few years, people weren't just identifying criminals by vague descriptions of their faces. Fingerprinting meant it was a lot easier to tie a criminal to a crime. Good stuff. At number 5, we're going to be talking about the discovery that the Earth goes round the Sun, otherwise known as the heliocentric theory. For thousands of years, people thought that the Earth was the center of the solar system until this guy, Copernicus, came along in the first half of the 16th century and proved through a meticulous scientific method that the observation of the planet's movements only made sense if the Sun was the center of the solar system and not the Earth. Nowadays, we take it for granted that the Earth isn't the center of the solar system, but back then, people didn't really like it, especially the Catholic Church. It went against pretty much everything that people thought at the time, so it was a very big discovery. Coming in number 4 now, we've got evolution, or more specifically, the discovery of the Tuang child. This was a nickname given to the remains of a fossilized primate found in 1924. It was discovered at a quarry site in South Africa and was eventually identified as belonging to a member of a species that was in a transition state between ancient apes and modern day humans. It was dated at being an amazing 2.8 million years old and was a key piece of evidence in proving Darwin right in his theory that humans originated from Africa. And now at number 3, we've got vaccination. Vaccination saving lives is a well-known fact these days. For example, the measles vaccination is estimated to have saved 17.1 million lives since the year 2000. It cannot be understated how many diseases vaccinations have helped prevent. Edward Jenner was an English surgeon who in 1874 noticed that milkmaids often got the mild disease cowpox, but never the deadly disease of smallpox. He figured this means that they were in the same family of diseases, and catching cowpox made you resistant to smallpox. He injected kids with a form of cowpox and then injected them with a form of smallpox afterwards, and amazingly, for the first time in history, none of them died. This paved the way for modern day vaccinations, and it proved his theory correct, but it was a pretty crazy way of doing it. At number 2, we've got DNA. In 1953, biochemists Francis Crick and James Watson were the people who created the first accurate model of the molecular structure deoxyribonucleic acid, otherwise known as DNA. This was a huge breakthrough in science, as DNA is the master code to how living organisms are built, operate, and reproduce. Discovering the properties and shape of our own DNA on the molecular level allowed scientists to develop cures for many deadly diseases. Eventually, this allowed scientists to map out the entire human genome, which is basically the instruction guide on how to build me or you or literally any other human. Very cool stuff. And finally, at number 1, we have got penicillin. Now, this one has saved an immeasurable amount of lives since it was first discovered in 1928 by 47-year-old Alexander Fleming. He grew bacteria in small glass plates to study deadly diseases, but struggled to stop mold from getting in there and contaminating it. When he returned to his lab one day from a trip, he found that one of his dishes of bacteria had failed to grow. A type of mold called Penicillium notatum had found its way into the dish and had stopped the growth of bacteria there. This might have been the most important mold ever found because it was eventually developed into the drug penicillin, which has saved millions and millions of lives and is the thing that any doctor will give you if you get a nasty infection.
Want to see more videos like this one? Check out this video next! It's about mysterious small towns from around the world that are hiding some terrible dark secrets that will mess you up. Click the video now to find out more. You won't regret this decision.